Hello, everybody. It is June the 26th, which means today is my last class of the year. We're looking at violence in the Jewish tradition, biblical, rabbinic, and now modern. And today we're going to start with a piece from Yeshayahu Leibovitz. This was published originally in Hebrew in 1953 and published ultimately in English in his volume Judaism, Human Values, and the Jewish State, an excellent book, particularly if you're interested in the thought of Yeshayahu Leibovitz. It's a word about him, brother to the famous Nechama Leibovitz, the scholar of Jewish Torah commentaries. By profession, Yeshayahu Leibovitz was a professor of chemistry. That was his day job. But he was at the same time a public philosopher and frequent critic of the Israeli state. He was a religiously observant Jew, absolutely 100%. But his approach to Jewish life and living and his approach to what Israel is and should be is quite different than what we're seeing today from the national religious camp, for sure. He was a major critic. He really saw the Jewish state as existing to serve Jewish needs without any sort of holiness imbued within the state itself. It's only holy if it does holy things or enables holy things, but it itself is not holy. And he, at the site, basically thought if you were given the phone book and that's what you're supposed to, Torah says you should daven, you daven the phone book every day. He wasn't exactly the most, hippy dippy spiritual kind of guy out there. So this is called After Kibbutz. So first, anyone know what Kibbutz is? Okay, so in October of 53, this is at a time when it wasn't infrequent to have cross-border raids, particularly from the Arab side of the Green Line to the Jewish side. And in October 53, a mother and two of her children were killed or murdered. As a response, an Israeli force, and I actually believe this was Arik Sharon's force, went past the line in some sort of retaliatory attack, leaving 50 killed. And the actual number is a little bit still contested, but that's around there. Thank you. You're welcome. This action caused a storm of protests in the world. Israel's explanation that the act was carried out because the bitterness and wrath in Israel against the crimes of infiltration from the region was not accepted by public opinion in the world, and the UN Security Council strongly condemned Israel. And certainly internally, the government tried to slough it off this way and that, but ultimately, it made the outside news, and they had to deal with it. Kibbutz, its causes, implications, and the action itself are put to the great test that we as a nation are put as a result of national relation, political independence, and our military power. We're bearers of a culture which for many generations derived certain spiritual benefits from conditions of exile, foreign rule, and political impotence. Okay, so this is actually a big moment in Jewish history, this Kibbutz moment, or how we respond to it. For a long time, the questions of power and politics really weren't relevant questions to us. And now they are. And this is 5 years after the War of Independence, in which you could certainly make the argument about the defensive necessities, etc., and the creation of a state being an exigent time. But now we're established, and this was, it was awful. It was a cross-border raid. 3 people were murdered. But this wasn't an all-out act of war. Our morality and conscience were conditioned by an insulated existence in which we could cultivate values and sensibilities that did not attested in the crucible reality, right? Everything was hypothetical until now. In our own eyes, and to some extent in those others as well, we appear to have gained control over one of the terrible drives to which human nature is subject, and to abhor the atrocities to which it impels all human societies, the impulse to communal murder. We've managed to avoid committing communal murder for a couple thousand years at least. Well done, Jews. While congratulating ourselves upon this, we ignored or attempt to ignore that in our historical situation, such mass murder was not one of the means at our disposal for self-defense or for the attainment of collective aspirations. From the standpoint of both moral vocation and religious action, exile existence enabled us to evade the decisive test. We couldn't have done this before, so it was hypothetical. It wouldn't have worked even if we tried. Attachment to the galut and the opposition of many of the best representatives of Judaism to political redemption within historic reality was, in no small measure, a form of escapism, reflecting unconscious fear of such a test. Fear the loss of religious moral superiority, which is easy to maintain in the absence of temptation, easy to lose in other circumstances. Right? It's an interesting argument. He's basically saying, the turn to diaspora life, fine, it was partially pushed upon us, but there are those amongst us who are happy to have it and didn't really try to regain any sort of political sovereignty because they didn't actually want to have to make difficult decisions. They much more appreciated operating within the ivory tower than on the battlefield, where your theories were pursuing peace and all that is actually put to the test. However, values are precious to the extent that the realization is difficult and easily frustrated. This is the true religious and moral significance of a regaining political independence and the capacity to deploy force. You're now being put to the test. Okay, time has come. We have to figure this out. Are we capable not only of suffering for the sake of values we cherish, but also of acting in accordance with them? Right? Suffer one thing, to actually act is another. It is easy to suffer physically, material, and even sacrifice one's life for their sake. This requires only physical courage, which is abundant to a surprising degree in all human communities. Right? He can't even say the Jews. We've shown a lot of bravery, courage in letting ourselves be killed over the years. He can't even say that. Well, everyone does this. He doesn't like Jews as being special. It is much more difficult to forego out of consideration for such values. Actions would promote other prize ends, legitimate communal needs and interests. The moral problem becomes acute when two good inclinations clash. The overcoming of an inclination by a good one is difficult, but not problematic. Okay, so when your values are put to a test, that's when we really get to see things going. Feel free to stop me at any time. It is very easy and therefore hardly worthwhile to express moral reservations about acts of violence and slaughter when one bears no responsibility for defending the community in whose cause such acts are perpetrated. Right? It's always easy to point to someone else's faults when there's no repercussion for you. I think we see this today. Before the establishment of the state, the community included some adherents of purist morality who immigrated to Palestine against the wishes of the Arabs and conducted lives here under the direction of British bayonets and the arms of the Haganah, but considered the right of other Jews to immigrate dependent on the consent of the Arabs. They declared Aliyah without such consent to be immoral. Yet they did not oppose the creation operation of the Jewish National Cultural Center, Hebrew, and Al-Quds against the anger objections of the Arabs because this institution was dear to them. Nevertheless, they allowed themselves to denounce the institutions of the Yishuv, which were responsible for bringing in Jews and sending them on the land, when in the face of vigorous Arab opposition, they carried out these activities. Okay, so you'll see where he's going with this, but he's trying to demonstrate that there's a certain, what's the word I'm looking for? They are saying one thing and doing another, right? Even these leftists who really think that you should only been able to come to the land of Israel with the permission of the Arabs. Well, how did you get to Israel? You're not getting up and leaving, right? So until you're willing to take that step, maybe you should keep your mouth closed, right? The word I'm looking for, hypocrites, that's the word. And I have to say, I feel a little bit of it when people invoke, indigenous rights anywhere and aren't themselves indigenous here. Right? If you really believe strongly indigenous rights, you wouldn't be here. You would get up and go home to wherever you came from, so to speak. Right? But it's silliness. You can't. And this is from someone who's done a lot of work in bridging Jewish and indigenous communities. You can't. It's either one or the other. You lose all credibility when you try to do both. Even after the establishment of our state, for which we alone are responsible, in which only we have the power to act, some of our intellectuals pretending to represent Jewish teaching of mercy and charity, address themselves to the ruler of another state and petitioned him to pardon spies who would threaten the security of the state. And footnote 1. Anyone know who he's talking about? Julius and Ethel Rosenberg.
Oh, well.
And so people, you build up a state, you know what it is to spy and what have you. You're going to tell another state they can't deal with their own spies. And Rosenberg's aside, the question of their actual culpability in the crime is a big question. And that's also in 53. These self-righteous saints in Jerusalem failed to appreciate that since they were not responsible for the security of the United States, and their actions and reactions had no influence for good or bad, it was easy for them to be the righteous ones. It's easy to say you shouldn't do that when you have no skin in the game. The President of the United States, however, bore the responsibility, welfare, and security of 180 million fellow Americans. And the choice of justice or mercy could affect their faith. The righteous ones were not in this position. Only the decision of one who's capable of acting and whom rests responsibility for acting or refraining from action can pass the genuine test of morality, right? You can only really be tested if you're wearing the shoes, right? If you're not wearing the shoes, anything you say really doesn't jive. Like it doesn't mean anything because you're not responsible for anybody else. Danny's shaking his head. Yeah, it's a problematic statement to make because we have to be able to judge someone else. To some extent. We have to. And we're not in their shoes. But there are certain things which you should be able to say that someone else does that are unacceptable. Even if you don't bear the responsibility of whatever responsibility they have. We, the bearers of morality, which abominates the spilling of innocent blood, face our acid test only now that we've become capable of defending ourselves in response to our own security. Defense and security often appear to require the spilling of innocent blood. So you're starting off and you're getting a feeling here that he's some sort of maybe a warmonger, right? Like if you can't judge us because you aren't us. And by the way, when you're acting in self-defense, sometimes you have to spill innocent blood. That's the nature of warfare. And if they started it and they said they're going to do it again, we have to defend ourselves. And in that defense, it's plausible to accept some degree of innocent blood being shed. That is acceptable within that war. There's more problem did not arise in connection with the war we conducted for liberation and national restoration. True, we used to see war as the craft of Esav, right? That is, say it's for the Goyim, like not our thing. It was possible only to the extent that was made into a way of life in the sense of by thy sword shall you live. Okay, yeah, you know what? It's their thing, but only if their thing is militarism, right? But if it's simply existence, that's a different story. A war often enough is one of the manifestations of the social reality, an inescapable part of it, so long as messianic redemption has not occurred. We accept war without enthusiasm or admiration, but also without bitterness or protest, just as we accept many repulsive manifestations of human biological reality. In declaring our will to live as a real historic nation, not a metahistorical and metaphysical one, real people, right, with real blood and guts and a real land, we took upon ourselves the functions of national life we had shunned when we are not bound by the tasks and concerns of normal national existence. By the logic of history and of moral evaluation, our war of independence was a necessary consequence of our 2,000-year exile. Only one prepared to justify historically, religiously, or morally the continuation of the exilic existence could refuse to take upon themselves the moral responsibility for using the sword to restore freedom. Unless you're willing to say we shouldn't have Israel, I'm very happy in the diaspora. You can't judge the decision of how, you can't judge how the War of Independence was conducted. Because the other option is diaspora life. And diaspora life did not end well. End, right? So therefore, we're going to have to accept the war, and with war, there's innocents who die. Therefore, in our religious moral stock taking, we neither justify the bloodshed of the war, which our blood was spilled no less than their enemies, nor do we apologize for it. The problematic issues concern the manner of conducting that war, which goes on to this very day. What has to be done after this war will be over? It is a difficult and perplexing problem. Once the craft of a Sav has been granted legitimacy, the distinction between the permissible and the forbidden, justified and blameworthy, is very subtle. It is like that handbreadth between heaven and hell. We must constantly examine whether we have transgressed and crossed that fine dividing line. Once we're in it, and we have to be in it, we're okay to be in it, we understand we have to be in it. Therefore, we could also judge it. We need to be exceptionally careful with what we do with it. Because he also knows how quick and easy it is to slide into a militaristic society. And certainly we saw, Tamara's sharing out, I think it's similar language about the fear of militarism, right? And just the worship almost of the military. And that it's so common in wartime, everyone starts becoming, and that's helpful if the war is justified, because it helps succeed in the war, but it doesn't help after the war's over, because then you're still a militaristic society. And I remember, there are something like, I don't know, 20 to 50,000 Israelis living in Berlin. It's a crazy number. And if you ever spend some time with them, you have a few who are thinking they'll be there for a few years and go back, and it's an opportunity, whatever. But there are a lot of Israelis who move there permanently, and of course, this is a certain segment of the Israeli public. They're self-selected, but they're self-selected to leave because they find Israel to be too much of a militaristic society. And Germany, of all places, is where they're actually find a home, because it is the opposite in a lot of ways. Germany has transformed to be into an anti-militaristic society. Right? They have a military, but they're very, very concerned and very questioning about what that military should do and how it should behave. And some people find that to be really refreshing. Not that they disagree that Israel should have a military, it should, but this focus on the military, or that how centered it is in social life, is a real problem.
The United States is a very good example of a country which worships the military. The president is the head of the military as well as the head of the civil government.
Right, although that's not entirely uncommon.
No, in Canada, we don't have it.
Right, in Canada, it's a different setup. Yeah, Canada, we don't have the same sort of military worship.
Worship of any public event has to have this great military presence. And
yeah, no, I agree.
And the Surah for General so-and-so and
I agree, and I don't think it's healthy. I gave a drasha at Beth Tzedek once. I think it could have been over the high holidays, in which I talked about being in Israel with Deborah and Jacob. Jacob was very, very little, and seeing for sale an IDF T-shirt, for kids' size, something very small. Maybe Deborah's interested in buying it, and I said no. I said, it's one thing to be supportive, it's another thing to glorify. And an army is a necessary evil. It's not something which we should be walking around and saying, with a T-shirt for on a kid. Like it just doesn't. I didn't like it. And then not everyone liked what I had to say. That's okay. Sometimes you have to give those sermons too. We can indeed justify the action of Kibbutz before the world. Its spokesmen and leaders admonish us for having adopted the method of reprisal, cruel mass punishment of innocent people for the crimes of others in order to prevent their recurrence, method which has been condemned by the conscience of the world, right? That's part of the Israeli explanation, right? We went overboard so they wouldn't do it again, because they would know we'd do it again. We could argue that we have not behaved differently than did the Americans, the Tacic, and the British in deploying the atomic bomb, right? And right, which was only 8 years prior. America saw herself in the fourth year of a war she had not initiated, and after the loss of 250,000 of her sons, facing the prospect of continued war in the style of Iwo Jima and Okinawa for an unseeable period of time. This fear led to the atrocity of Hiroshima, where 100,000 civilians, mostly women and children, were killed in one day, to bring about the quick termination of this nightmare. We turn now in the sixth year of a war that was forced upon us and continues to inspire constant fear of plunder and murder. No wonder that border settlers and those responsible for life and security overreacted and reciprocated with cruel slaughter and destruction. We understand why people do these things. They're tired, they don't want to do it, they don't want to be killed anymore. It is therefore possible to justify this action, but let us not try to do so. Okay, this is obviously the turning point in the article. You could make the claim. This is how you'd explain it, but let's not go down that road. I was at a presentation by a scholar who's affiliated with the Harman Institute. I don't. His name is not coming to mind. He's an Israeli peace activist, but he's spending the year, I think, in North America, and he looked at the 4 different sort of responses to Kibbutz. I believe that this was one of them. And Yisraeli, who might read a little bit, was another one. And so one way to approach the Kibbutz is deny that it happened, right? And say it would have been okay if they did it. You can deny it and say it wouldn't have been okay if they did it. You can say that they did it and justify it, as one Israeli rabbi does, although I think he's overread. I don't think he's actually saying what everyone's saying he says. And then there's Leibovitz, who says it happened, but I'm going to tell you why it's a problem. Let us rather recognize its distressing nature. There's instructive precedents of Kibbutz, Shechem, and Dinah, right? We remember what happens, right? Dinah is taken captive by Shechem, and ultimately 2 of her brothers go in, and after everyone is circumcised, which is the deal that Yaakov strikes with the city, then they can marry Dinah after that. Well, once they're circumcised, these 2 brothers go in and kill everybody in their weakened state. Seems like a straightforward case of revenge. Sons of Jacob did not act as they did out of pure wickedness and malice. They had a decisive justification. Should one deal with our sister as with a harlot? Right? They do this. Shouldn't they be punished for what they did? You can't do this. The Torah, which narrates the actions of Shimon and Levi and Shechem, adds to the description of the atrocity only 3 words in the Hebrew text, which apparently it conveyed the moral judgments of their behavior, and came upon the city unawares and slew all the males. Sons of Jacob came upon the slain and spoiled the city because they had defiled their sister. Nevertheless, because of this action, 2 tribes of Israel were cursed for generations by their father, Jacob. Jacob is none too pleased with what his children do. Although there are good reasons and ethical justifications for the Shechem Kibbutz action, there's also an ethical postulate, which is not itself a matter of rationalization, which calls forth a curse upon all these justified and valid considerations. Shechem operation, the curse of Jacob, when he told his children what would befall them in the end of days, is an example of the frightening problematic ethical reality. There may well be actions which can be vindicated and even justified, and are nevertheless accursed. There's a gray zone in there. And sure, you couldn't justify, you couldn't say it had to for this reason or that reason, but maybe you shouldn't have done, maybe you shouldn't do it anyway. It's permissible, but don't. citation of this example from the Torah does not reflect belief in the uniqueness of the morality of Judaism. It does not imply the action is forbidden us as Jews. It is intended to indicate the action is forbidden per se. The morality of Judaism is a most questionable concept, not only because morality does not admit a modifying attribute and cannot be Jewish or not Jewish. The concept is self-contradictory for anyone who does not deliberately ignore its religious content. Right? He sees morality in Judaism as existing in different spheres. That something is moral or is not, it doesn't need a Jewish stamp to make it so. And that's, again, for him, Jewish life is about there are commands and you do them, and like that's life. And they exist outside of the ethical ethical sphere. And I think it was said of Leibovitz, not someone else, and it's apocryphal, but what are you gonna do? He lived in Yerushalayim, and it was said that on the day of Purim, he would be outside of the city, and then day of Purim he'd be in the city, and then Shushan Purim he'd be outside of the city, because this way he didn't have to listen to the Megillah. And he didn't like the Megillah because of the way it ends. Right? And that we shouldn't, and it's a real problem having this as our central religious text, when at the end we go in and we kill everybody. There is, however, a specifically Jewish aspect of the Kibbutz incident, not as a moral problem, but an authentically religious one. We must ask ourselves, and this is, I don't know if I fully agree with the analysis, so this is the critical paragraph. We'll see what you think. What produced this generation of youth, which felt no inhibition or inner compunction in performing the atrocity when given the inner urge and external occasion for retaliation? After all, these young people are not a wild mob, but youth raised and nurtured on the values of a Zionist education, on concepts of the dignity of man and human society. The answers at the events at Kibbutz were a consequence of applying the religious category of holiness to social, national, and political values and interests. I use its prevalence in the education of young people as well as in the dissemination of public information. So I'll take a pause there. I don't know enough about the educational system of Israel in the 40s, in the early 50s, but maybe they learned about the moral worth of every person, dignity of man and human society. They didn't talk about concepts like holiness in the kibbutzim where this unit was drawn from. They're secular, right? So that piece of it, while I think it's an important conversation, especially for today, where like 40% of the officer corps are religious, and there's been apparently basically a freeze on any promotions for any religious soldier because of fears that they're going to be too religiously involved and not taking commands. I don't know how exactly well it fits here, but we learn a lot about what Leibovitz thinks about holiness, not necessarily how much they thought. And the other problem is they are, if you're in the military, presumably you receive directions from your commanding officer, do this and that. And your commanding officer says, go into that hut, and if anyone moves, shoot them. We know that there are international law and state-specific law which prohibit a soldier to do something which they think is illegal. But that may not have been the case in Israel at the time. And in any event, if you're exo commander, you do it. Even if there's a piece which might feel like this is wrong. But as an overall idea, I like what he has to say about the misapplication of holiness. The concept of holiness, the concept of the absolute, which is beyond all categories of human thought and evaluation, is transferred to the profane. From a religious standpoint, only God is holy, and only his imperative is absolute. All human values and all obligations and undertakings derived from them are profane and have no absolute validity. Country, state, and nation impose pressing obligations and tasks, which are sometimes difficult. They do not, on that account, acquire sanctity. They are always subject to judgment and criticism from a higher standpoint. For the sake of that which is holy, and perhaps only for its sake, man is capable of acting without any restraint. Okay, so if you were 100% sure that God commanded you to do something, that a piece of you saying that's not a good thing, okay, you have to do it. But we don't have that kind of relationship with God. I don't.
But what's his name? The Aaron's son did when he killed the
What, for Pinchas and
Nicholas. He felt that he was
yeah,
by God, and it turns out that
yeah. The moral of that story is I don't think is entirely clear.
yeah, sort of turns out that he was not criticized for it. He was lauded for his.
Yes, but he's also given a breach shalom
Actually, yeah.
to say maybe you're a little bit too fast on the sword, on the spear there. Excuse me. In our discourse and practice, we've uprooted the category of holiness from its authentic location and transferred it to inappropriate objects, thus incurring all the dangers involved in such a distorted use of the concept. This original sin of our education appears already in our Declaration of Independence. Its use of the expression "the Rock of Israel" in the concluding sentence reflects a fraudulent agreement between two sections of the public, which is to the credit of neither. Right, so you may recall in the writing of the Declaration of Independence, the religious camp basically insisted you have to have God in there, and the secular camp said over my dead body. So they concluded by saying, okay, we'll agree to put Suri Israel because it's metaphoric, and the religion can say it's God, and then other ones could talk about no, it's actually the land, it's the rocks of Israel. The secular nation state adjusted the sense of this term at its convenience and is used to bribe the religious minority. The latter did not refuse to accept the bribe, even though it recognized the hypocrisy implicit in the use of the sanctified epithet. The Rock of Israel, invoked by King David and by the prophet Isaiah, and incorporating the benediction following the reading of Shema in the morning prayer, is not an attribute of Israel, but is above Israel and transcends all human values and manifestations, personal and collective. The Rock of Israel, Declaration of Independence, is immanent in Israel itself. It is the human essence and might of Israel. Israel is manifested in history. The use of the term from the Bible and the prayer book to designate values of our consciousness, feeling, and the forces motivating our national political activity leads people to transfer the connotations of holiness, the absolute normative force associated with this term, to these human values. Don't do it, he says. Don't make these human things that you have to do holy. If the nation and its welfare and the country and its security are holy, and if the sword is the Rock of Israel, then kibbutz is possible and permissible, right? If you make everything holy, then you make it justifiable. And if they've already done it and it's holy, then it is the right thing to have done, because real holy things don't do the wrong thing. Certainly not kill innocent people. So obviously, they deserve what was coming to them. This is the terrible punishment for transgressing the stringent prohibition, don't take God's name in vain. Transgression may cause our third commonwealth to incur the curse of our father, Jacob. I knew Danny would like this.
Yes.
Gilbert, what do you think?
I was in Israel during this period, immediately after the message. And I was in the army at that point. And I spoke to many young kids, young people who were there because that's where they went. And I didn't discover any viewpoint from anybody about should we be here, should we not be here, is this justified, is it not justified? They simply said point blank, they hurt us, we're hurting them. That's all I ever heard. I was there for over 2 months.
And they're hurting us, we will hurt them harder or worse or whatever. It's not, they kill 2 of our people, we'll kill 2 of
Right,
theirs.
it's not eye for an eye.
That's
It's not even a 7-1, which is also the ratio talks about.
This case is it's 50-3. In this particular case.
Right, I mean, part of the criticism of like proportional response
Yeah.
is that, like, what does that mean in this case? Like, would a proportional response mean they have to go find a mother and her 2 sons and kill them? Like, that's also absurd, right?
Just as a small aside, I did a project many years ago, and I looked at recognizable social groups. And I went all the way back to about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. I didn't get them all, of course. And I found an interesting underline. The recognizable social groups, only the Jewish groups respected human life. And of all of those groups, almost nothing remains except the Jewish group.
Okay.
Now, we respected Jewish life, or we respected life, human life, at our own price. We paid for it, and we're still paying for it. One could argue that that's foolish. That's what this argument's all about.
Yeah.
And the justification is it's holy. Well, the Arabs have a justification for killing. To them, that's holy. That the,
Yeah, labor say none of it's holy.
Yeah.
well, I mean, the Arab books, looking for words, it states very clearly that the job of a good Muslim is to punish the kafir for abusing that which belongs to Allah, and he must be punished by death.
So
That's an underlying principle of Islam.
You could probably argue that's not quite.
yeah, I don't want to get into what Islam does or doesn't say.
I've had good arguments
Yeah.
on that.
Because I think it's beyond our scope here.
Yeah, well, okay, I believe that affects us because it's not an underlying principle of Judaism.
Yeah, it's certainly not an underlying principle of Judaism. That said, like, you know, if you blaspheme, you're supposed to be put to death. Like, we have our own text that if we wanted to cherry pick and say, let's find ways to criticize Judaism, we absolutely could. But religion is what the people of the day make of that religion.
Yeah,
And there's no one here, as far as I know, who's going around saying, yeah, we really should be executing blasphemers. I haven't heard that one yet. Anyone online? You want to jump in? No? Okay.
well, like I said earlier, it was interesting that I did not see anybody trying to get justification for being there as a soldier and killing Arabs. Nobody was telling me they had the right to be there, and nobody said anything about holy or anything. They said, this is a human thing. Somebody kicks my cat, I'm gonna shoot his dog. And not beyond that. That's the amazing part, not beyond that.
Okay. It was not done in the name of holiness or religion or anything else like that. It was
Not that I felt.
correct, and I think you're right. I think Rabbi said the same thing.
Yeah.
But was there a sense of proportionality, or is there a sense of you open the door, and since you open the door, you can't blame us if whatever happens is your problem.
There wasn't enough of that.
Well,
It should have been
well-
stated as such.
It seems to happen that way. You know, what was the other master that was
Hubert Kiza?
the case where Air West Bank, whatever it was.
Talking about
Later.
Jared Singh?
Yeah.
Well, that was played up in an interesting manner because it was the opposition to the Israel army.
No,
That was Menachem Begin's people.
What, no, okay. No, maybe I have the wrong incident. There's an incident where they declared a curfew on a certain town. And then people didn't know about the curfew, Arabs were coming back to work in Israel, and they were shot because they were violating the curfew.
Yeah, that's the way it was written.
Yeah. That's.
What the
probably what it was.
circumstances were, I don't know. But that's the way it was written, that they came in 15 minutes late from the field.
Yeah.
Well, but it was played up, or it was advertised, or what, for years, that it was an argument between Yitzhak Rabin and Ben Gurion and Menachem Begin and his boys.
And they get to those boys are the ones that carried out the.
Well, I mean, you can tie the destruction of the El Talena into that argument too. You know, because it was an argument, it was an internecine argument.
Yeah.
I mean,
That
these
was-
were political strengths that were arguing and had a fight out. Now, that's not justified anywhere. It certainly is not in the name of holiness. Not with us,
No.
but amongst the Arabs with their warlords, it is. They justify killing each other as the will of Allah.
I think, yeah, there are people, look, certainly anyone who goes into battle or any other violent activity and screams Allahu Akbar, they're messaging that they're doing this in the name of Allah, right? That they see this as a religious imperative. So, yeah, whether, and this is a question for another day, you know, I think most people have more than one motive at any given moment, right? So you do something because you're really looking for political liberation and you frame it in religious terms, or vice versa. And yeah, I think that's true for a lot of things and a lot of wars and a lot of people.
Yes, but it breaks down at a very interesting point. I see the common person on the street in some manner or other goes along with the attitude and the viewpoints of leadership. That's what leadership is. And my officer told me to go and kill Arabs, so I'm killing Arabs. And the Arab can say the same thing, only his officer is Allah. So he says. Well, I'm in the middle terms, I'm an officer. What's my opinion? Am I justified in ordering this kind of nonsense or not? I don't know.
I was going to look at this in particular. He has a section which analyzes Shaul Yisraeli's extended essay on Kibya in light of halacha. But maybe we won't do it. It's 10-3. We'll skip it over. You can read this at home. It's an interesting essay. It's my 2 cents on it is, and this is in part informed by a take that Robert Eisen, a scholar of this stuff, recently wrote, that I think he basically argues that they were allowed to do what they did, and you're allowed to go out and exterminate people within the realms of halacha, and he shows why. I read it as sort of a post facto, like halachic analysis that wasn't meant to then be used for future, armies to make decisions. It's like it's just very academic for him. How do I play with this so that it's irresponsible to do? But I don't think he meant for people to come away with that saying that people should continue to behave in that way. And that's why people have read him for a long time, for what it's worth. All right, so everyone, that concludes this year's learning. And we'll be back next year. Topics are to be shared. We are excited to be welcoming our new rabbis, Rabbis Yerach and Nava Meyersdorf. And I need to spend some time with them before we set up the calendar for next year.